Kabalah and Kabalism articles by H. P. Blavatsky. The Kabalah and the Kabbalists' Tetragrammaton Isis unveiled and the Visishtadvaita Straight Thoughts on Death and Satan, a posthumous publication. H. P. Blavatsky Series No. 11 Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Bangalore 560,004 Ltd. Objects of the Theosophical movement: I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. The articles of H. P. Blavatsky and W. Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. Reprint edition, 1982, 1 JLLLS. Jr. By courtesy, the Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California 90007 USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560,009 and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560,004. Forward. It may be with some relief that students of H. P. Blavatsky's secret doctrine come upon her statement in the article, The Kabalah and the Kabbalists, published in Lucifer for May, 1892, that presently extant works on the Kabalah can teach scarcely anything to the student hungering after spiritual mysteries. The oral teachings known to Kabbalistic initiates have never appeared in print, while books now available have all suffered corruptions in their content by sectarian editors. At the hands of HPB, however, Kabbalistic writings serve two purposes: she makes of them evidence showing the presence of occult knowledge in the West, while at the same time describing their limitations and pointing to the misleading character of much of Kabbalistic symbolism. Tetragrammaton, which HPB printed in the Theosophist for November, 1887, is a scholarly explanation of the misconceptions in various Kabbalistic teachings, undertaken to deal with the claim that the Kabbalah is opposed to the septenary doctrine of Eastern philosophy. H.P.B.'s commentary on Kabbalistic doctrines amounts to a restoration of their true meaning, as found in Chaldean originals known to her. In Isis Unveiled and the Visishtadvaita, printed in the Theosophist for January, 1886, HPB replies to the assertion of a reader that in Isis she had expounded the teachings of a Vedantic school which ascribes personal attributes to the universal principle. This article has particular interest from the fact that in it HPB makes an explicit and clarifying statement concerning the preservation of distinct individuality in parinirvana, to which she adds the important qualification that this is a divine, not human, individuality. A similar statement will be found on page 266. Vol. I of the Secret Doctrine, and also on page 148 of Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge. Straight Thoughts on Death and Satan, appearing in the Theosophist for October, 1881, makes an excellent example of the use to which HPB put the work of the most distinguished Kabbalist of the 19th century, Eliphas Levi. She gives this former Catholic priest, unfrocked by the Church for his heretical tendencies, full credit as the most learned Kabbalist and occultist of our age, in Europe, while pointing out that the Kabbalists of that time had lost the true key to the esoteric meaning of Simeon ben Jaquet's Kabalah. A similar generosity pervades H.P.B.'s introduction to a posthumous publication, in the Theosophist for July, 1881, presenting the noted Kabbalist's account of the fate of the suicide after death. While Levi, whose true name was Abbé Louis Constant, left the church, he could, HPB says, never rid himself to his last day of a certain theological bias, making it necessary for her to say that she was far from agreeing with all his opinions. Yet she honored him for rejecting miracle and daring to discuss what science could not recognize, bringing down persecution on his head. Lucifer, May, 1892. The Kabbalah and the Kabbalists won at the close of the 19th century universal aspirations, especially when impeded and suppressed in their free manifestation, die out but to return with tenfold power. They are cyclic, like every other natural phenomenon, whether mental or cosmic, universal or national. Dam a river in one place, and the water will work its way into another, and break out through it like a torrent. One of such universal aspirations, the strongest perhaps in man's nature, is the longing to seek for the unknown, an ineradicable desire to penetrate below the surface of things, a thirst for the knowledge of that which is hidden from others. 9 children out of 10 will break their toys to see what there is inside. It is an innate feeling and is protean in form. It rises from the ridiculous, or perhaps rather from the reprehensible, to the sublime, for it is limited to indiscreet inquisitiveness, prying into neighbors' secrets, in the uneducated, and it expands in the cultured. Into that love for knowledge which ends in leading them to the summits of science, and fills the academies and the royal institutions with learned men. But this pertains to the world of the objective. The man in whom the metaphysical element is stronger than the physical, is propelled by this natural aspiration towards the mystical, to that which the materialist is pleased to call a superstitious belief in the supernatural. The Church, while encouraging our aspirations after the holy on strictly theological and orthodox lines, of course condemns at the same time the human craving after the same, whenever the practical search after it departs from its own lines. The memory of the thousands of illiterate witches, and the hundreds of learned alchemists, philosophers, and other Her1. The spelling of the word is various, some write Kabalah, others Kabalah. The latest writers have introduced a new spelling as more consonant with the Hebrew manner of writing the word and make it Kabalah. This is more grammatical, perhaps, but as no Englishman will ever pronounce a foreign name or word but in an English-ified way, to write the term simply Kabalah seems less pretentious and answers as well. Ticks, tortured, burnt, and otherwise put to death during the Middle Ages, remains as an ever-present witness to that arbitrary and despotic interference. In the present age both church and science, the blindly believing and the all-denying, are arrayed against the secret sciences, though both church and science believed in and practiced them. Especially the Kabbalah at a not very distant period of history. One says now, it is of the devil, the other that the devil is a creation of the church, and a disgraceful superstition, in short, that there is neither devil nor occult sciences. The first one forgets that it has publicly proclaimed, hardly 400 years ago, the Jewish Kabbalah as the greatest witness to the truths of Christianity, the second, that the most illustrious men of science were all alchemists, astrologers, and magicians, witness Paracelsus, Van Helmont, Roger Bacon, etc. But consistency has never been a virtue of modern science. It has religiously believed in all which it now denies, and it has denied all that it now believes in, from the circulation of the blood up to steam and electric power. This sudden change of attitude in both powers cannot prevent events from taking their natural course. The last quarter of our century is witnessing an extraordinary outbreak of occult studies, and magic dashes once more its powerful waves against the rocks of church and science, which it is slowly but as surely undermining. Anyone whose natural mysticism impels him to seek for sympathetic contact with other minds, is astonished to find how large a number of persons are not only interested in mysticism generally, but are actually themselves Kabbalists. The river dammed during the Middle Ages has flowed since noiselessly underground, and has now burst up as an irrepressible torrent. Hundreds today study the Kabbalah, where scarcely one or two could have been found some 50 years ago, when fear of the church was still a powerful factor in men's lives. But the long pent-up torrent has now diverged into two streams: Eastern occultism and the Jewish too. This is demonstrated by what we know of the life of John Picus de Mirandola. Ginsburg and others have stated the following facts, namely, that after having studied the Kabalah, Mirandola found that there is more Christianity than Judaism in the Kabalah. He discovered in it proofs for the doctrine of the Trinity, the Incarnation, the divinity of Christ, the heavenly Jerusalem, the fall of the angels, and so on. In 1486, when only 24 years old, he published 900 theses which were placarded in Rome, not without the consent or knowledge surely of the Pope and his government, and which he undertook to defend in the presence of all European scholars, whom he invited to the Eternal City, promising to defray their traveling expenses. Among the theses was the following: no science yields greater proof of the divinity of Christ than magic and the Kabbalah. The reason why will be shown in the present article. Kabalah, the traditions of the wisdom religion of the races that preceded the Adam of the fall, and the system of the ancient Levites of Israel, who most ingeniously veiled a portion of that religion of the pantheists under the mask of monotheism. Unfortunately many are called but few chosen. The two systems threaten the world of the mystics with a speedy conflict, which, instead of increasing the spread of the one universal truth, will necessarily only weaken and impede its progress. Yet, the question is not, once more, which is the one truth. For both are founded upon the eternal verities of prehistoric knowledge, as both, in the present age and the state of mental transition through which humanity is now passing, can give out only a certain portion of these verities. It is simply a question, which of the two systems contains most unadulterated facts, and, most important of all, which of the two presents its teachings in the most Catholic, i.e., unsectarian, and impartial manner. One, the Eastern system has veiled for ages its profound pantheistic Unitarianism with the exuberance of an exoteric polytheism, the other, as said above, with the screen of exoteric monotheism. Both are but masks to hide the sacred truth from the profane, for neither the Aryan nor the Semitic philosophers have ever accepted either the anthropomorphism of the many gods, or the personality of the one God, as a philosophical proposition. But it is impossible within the limits we have at our disposal, to attempt to enter upon a minute discussion of this question. We must be content with a simpler task. The rites and ceremonies of the Jewish law seem to be an abyss, which long generations of Christian fathers, and especially of Protestant reformers, have vainly sought to fill in with their far-fetched interpretations. Yet all the early Christians, Paul and the Gnostics, regarded and proclaimed the Jewish law as essentially distinct from the new Christian law. Saint Paul called the former an allegory, and St. Stephen told the Jews an hour before being stoned that they had not even kept the law that they had received from the angels, the sons, and as to the Holy Ghost, the impersonal Logos or Christos, as taught at initiation, they had resisted and rejected it as their fathers had done, Acts 7. This was virtually telling them that their law was inferior to the later one. Notwithstanding that the Mosaic books which we think we have in the Old Testament, cannot be more than 2 or 3 centuries older than Christianity, the Protestants have nevertheless made of them their sacred canon, on a par with, if not higher than, the Gospels. But when the Pentateuch was written, or rather rewritten after Esdras, i.e., after the rabbis had settled upon a new departure, a number of additions were made which were taken bodily from Persian and Babylonian doctrines, and this at a period subsequent to the colonization of Judea under the authority of the kings of Persia. This rediting was of course done in the same way as with all such scriptures. They were originally written in a secret key, or cipher, known only to the initiates. But instead of adapting the contents to the highest spiritual truths as taught in the third, the highest, degree of initiation, and expressed in symbolic language as may be seen even in the exoteric Puranas of India, the writers of the Pentateuch, revised and corrected, they who cared but for earthly and national glory, adapted only to astrophysiological symbols the supposed events of the Abrahams, Jacobs, and Solomons, and the fantastic history of their little race. Thus they produced, under the mask of monotheism, a religion of sexual and phallic worship, one that concealed an adoration of the gods, or the lower suns. No one would maintain that anything like the dualism and the angelolatry of Persia, brought by the Jews from the captivity, could ever be found in the real law, or books of Moses. For how, in such case, could the Sadducees, who reverenced the law, reject angels, as well as the soul and its immortality? And yet angels, if not the soul's immortal nature, are distinctly asserted to exist in the Old Testament, and are found in the Jewish modern scrolls. 3. This fact of the successive and widely differing redactions of that which we loosely term the books of Moses, and of their triple adaptation to the first, lowest, second, and third, or highest, degree of Sotelian initiation, and that still more puzzling fact of the diametrically opposite beliefs of the Sadducees and the other Jewish sects, all accepting, nevertheless, the same revelation, can be made comprehensible only in the light of our esoteric explanation. It also shows the reason why, when Moses and the prophets belong to the sodalities, the great mysteries, the latter yet seem so often to fulminate against the abominations of the Sodales and their sod. For had the old canon been translated literally, as is claimed, instead of being adapted to a MONO3, this is just what the Gnostics had always maintained quite independently of Christians. In their doctrines the Jewish God, the Elohim, was a hierarchy of low terrestrial annales and Ldabaoth. Dideful and Ielus. Theism absent from it, and to the spirit of each sect, as the differences in the Septuagint and Vulgate prove, the following contradictory sentences would be added to the hundreds of other inconsistencies in Holy Writ. Swiho the mysteries of Yoha, or Jehovah, are for those who fear him, says Psalm XXV. 14, mistranslated the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. Again Al is terrible in the great sod of the Kadshim is rendered as God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, Psalm 6. 7. The title of Kadshim, Kadosh Sing, means in reality something quite different from saints, though it is generally explained as priests. The holy and the initiated for the Kadshim were simply the Gali of the abominable mysteries, Sod, of the exoteric rites. They were, in short, the male notches of the temples, during whose initiations the arcanum, the Sod, from which Sodom, perchance, of physiological and sexual evolution, were divulged. These rites all belong to the first degree of the mysteries, so protected and beloved by David the friend of God. They must have been very ancient with the Jews, and were ever abominated by the true initiates. Thus we find the dying Jacob's prayer is that his soul should not come into the secret, Sod, in the original, of Simeon and Levi, the priestly caste, and into their assembly during which they slew a man, Genesis 6. 5, 6. 4. And yet Moses is claimed by the Kabbalists as chief of the Sodales. Reject the explanation of the secret doctrine and the whole Pentateuch becomes the abomination of abominations. Therefore, do we find Jehovah, the anthropomorphic God, everywhere in the Bible, but of Ansuph not one word is said. And therefore, also, was the Jewish metrology quite different from the numeral methods of other people. Instead of serving as an adjunct to other prearranged methods, to penetrate therewith as with a key into the hidden or implied meaning contained within the literal sentences as the initiated Brahmins do to this day, when reading their sacred books, the numeral system with the Jews is, as the author of Hebrew metrology tells us, the Holy Writ itself, that very thing, in esse, on which, and out of which, and by the continuous interweaving use of which, the very text of the for to slay a man meant, in the symbolism of the lesser mysteries, the rite during which crimes against nature were committed, for which purpose the Kadshim were set aside. Thus Cain slays his brother Abel, who, esoterically, is a female character and represents the first human woman in the third race after the separation of sexes. See also the source of measures, pp 253, 283 etc. Bible has been made to result, as its enunciation, from the beginning word of Genesis to the closing word of Deuteronomy. So true is this, indeed, that the authors of the New Testament who had to blend their system with both the Jewish and the pagan, had to borrow their most metaphysical symbols not from the Pentateuch, or even the Kabalah, but from the Aryan astrosymbology. One instance will suffice. Whence the dual meaning of the firstborn, the Lamb, the unborn, and the eternal, all relating to the Logos or Christos. We say from the Sanskrit Aya, a word the meanings of which are, a, the ram, or the lamb. The first sign of the zodiac, called in astronomy Mesha, b, the unborn, a title of the first Logos, or Brahma, the self-existent cause of all, described and so referred to in the Upanishads. The Hebrew Kabbalistic Gematria, Nodarikan, and Timura are very ingenious methods, giving the key to the secret meaning of Jewish symbology, one that applied the relations of their sacred imagery only to one side of nature, namely, the physical side. Their myths and the names and the events attributed to their biblical personages were made to correspond with astronomical revolutions and sexual evolution, and had not to do with the spiritual states of man, hence no such correspondences are to be found in the reading of their sacred canon. The real Mosaic Jews of the Sotiles, whose direct heirs on the line of initiation were the Sadducees, had no spirituality in them, nor did they feel any need for it apparently. The reader, whose ideas of initiation and adeptship are intimately blended with the mysteries of the afterlife and soul survival, will now see the reason for the great yet natural inconsistencies found on almost every page of the Bible. Thus, in the book of Job, a Kabbalistic treatise on Egypto-Arabic initiation, the symbolism of which conceals the highest spiritual mysteries, one finds yet this significant and purely materialistic verse: man born of a woman is like a flower, and is cut down, he fleet also as a shadow, and continueth not. 14:1,2. But Job speaks here of the personality, and he is right, for no initiate would say that the personality long survived the death of the physical body, the spirit alone is immortal. But this sentence in Job, the oldest document in the Bible, makes only the more brutally materialistic that in Ecclesiastes 3:19, etseq, one of the latest records. The writer, who speaks in the name of Solomon, and says that that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts, even as the one dieth, so dieth the other. So that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, is quite on a par with the modern Haeckel's, and expresses only that which he thinks. Therefore, no knowledge of Kabbalistic methods can help one in finding that in the Old Testament, which has never been there since the Book of the Law was rewritten, rather than found, by Hilkiah. Nor can the reading of the Egyptian symbols be much helped by the medieval Kabbalistic systems. Indeed, it is but the blindness of a pious illusion that can lead anyone to discover any spiritual and metaphysical correspondences or meaning in the Jewish purely astrophysiological symbology. On the other hand, the ancient pagan religious systems, so-called, are all built upon abstract spiritual speculations, their gross external forms being, perhaps, the most secure veil to hide their inner meaning. It can be demonstrated, on the authority of the most learned Kabbalists of our day, that the Zohar, and almost all the Kabbalistic works, have passed through Christian hands. Hence, that they cannot be considered any longer as universal, but have become simply sectarian. This is well shown by Picus de Mirandolas' thesis upon the proposition that no science yields greater proof of the divinity of Christ than magic and the Kabbalah. This is true of the divinity of the Logos, or of the Christos of the Gnostics, b. Cause that Christos remains the same word of the ever unmanifested deity, whether we call it Parabrahm or Ansup by whatever name he himself is called, Krishna, Buddha, or Ormuzd. But this Christos is neither the Christ of the churches, nor yet the Jesus of the Gospels, it is only an impersonal principle. Nevertheless, the Latin Church made capital of this thesis, the result of which was, that as in the last century, so it is now in Europe and America. Almost every Kabbalist is now a believer in a personal God, in the very teeth of the original impersonal Ansup, and is, moreover, a more or less heterodox, but still a Christian. This is due entirely to the ignorance of most people, that the Kabbalah, the Zohar especially, we have, is not the original book of splendor, written down from the oral teachings of Simon ben Jacques, and, b. that the latter, being indeed an exposition of the hidden sense of the writings of Moses, so called, was as equally good an exponent of the esoteric meaning contained under the shell of the literal sense in the scriptures of any pagan religion. Nor do the modern Kabbalists seem to be aware of the fact, that the Kabbalah as it now stands, with its more than revised texts, its additions made to apply to the New as much as to the Old Testament, its numerical language recomposed so as to apply to both, and its crafty veiling, is no longer able now to furnish all the ancient and primitive meanings. In short, that no Kabbalistic work now extant among the Western nations can display any greater mysteries of nature, than those which Ezra and Co., and the later co-workers of Moses de Leon, desired to unfold. The Kabbalah contains no more than the Syrian and Chaldean Christians and ex-Gnostics of the 13th century wanted those works to reveal. And what they do reveal hardly repays the trouble of passing one's life in studying it. For if they may, and do, present a field of immense interest to the mason and mathematician, they can teach scarcely anything to the student hungering after spiritual mysteries. The use of all the 7 keys to unlock the mysteries of being in this life, and the lives to come, as in those which have gone by, show that the Chaldean Book of Numbers, and the Upanishads undeniably conceal the most divine philosophy as it is that of the universal wisdom religion. But the Zohar, now so mutilated, can show nothing of the kind. Besides which, who of the Western philosophers or students has all those keys at his command? These are now entrusted only to the highest initiates in Gupta Vidya, to great adepts, and, surely it is no self-taught tyro, not even an isolated mystic, however great his genius and natural powers, who can hope to unravel in one life more than 1 or 2 of the lost keys. 6. The key to the Jewish metrology has been undeniably unraveled, and a very important key it is. But as we may infer from the words of the discoverer himself in the footnote just quoted, though that key, concealed in the sacred metrology, discloses the fact that Holy Writ contains a rational science of sober 5, the writer in the Masonic Review is thus quite justified in saying as he does, that the Kabbalistic field is that in which astrologers, necromancers, black and white magicians, fortune-tellers, chiromancers, and all the like, revel and make claims to supernaturalism ad nauseam, and he adds, the Christian quarrying into its mass of mysticism, claims its support and authority for that most perplexing of all problems, the Holy Trinity, and the portrayed character of Christ. With equal assurance, but more effrontery, the knave, in the name of Kabalah, will sell amulets and charms, tell fortunes, draw horoscopes, and just as readily give specific rules for raising the dead and actually the devil. Discovery has yet to be made of what Kabalah really consists, before any weight or authority can be given to the name. On that discovery will rest the question whether the name should be received as related to matters worthy of rational acknowledgement. The writer claims that such a discovery has been made, and that the same embraces rational science of sober and great worth. The Kabalah from the Masonic Review for September, 1885. By Brother J. Ralston Skinner, Macmillan Lodge, number 141. And great worth, yet it helps to unveil no higher spiritual truth than that which all astrologers have insisted upon in every age, i.e., the close relation between the sidereal and all the terrestrial bodies, human beings included. The history of our globe and its humanities is prototyped in the astronomical heavens from first to last, though the Royal Society of Physicists may not become aware of it for ages yet to come. By the showing of the said discoverer himself, the burden of this secret doctrine, this Kabalah, is of pure truth and right reason, for it is geometry with applied proper numbers, of astronomy and of a system of measures, viz., the Masonic inch, the 24-inch gauge, or the double foot, the yard, and the mile. These were claimed to be of divine revelation and impartation, by the possession and use of which, it could be said of Abram, blessed of the Most High God, Abram, measure of heaven and earth, the creative law of measure. And is this all that the primitive Kabbalah contained? No, for The author remarks elsewhere, what the originally and intended right reading was in the Pentateuch who can tell? Thus allowing the reader to infer that the meanings implied in the exoteric, or dead letter of the Hebrew texts, are by no means only those revealed by metrology. Therefore are we justified in saying that the Jewish Kabbalah, with its numerical methods, is now only one of the keys to the ancient mysteries, and that the Eastern or Aryan systems alone can supply the rest, and unveil the whole truth of creation. 6. What this numeral system is, we leave its discoverer to explain himself. According to him, like all other human productions of the kind, the Hebrew text of the Bible was in characters which could serve as sound signs for syllable utterance, or for this purpose what are called letters. Now in the first place, these original character signs were also pictures, each one of them, and these pictures of themselves stood for ideas which could be communicated, much like the original Chinese letters. Gustav Siffard shows that the Egyptian hieroglyphics numbered over 600 picture characters, which embraced the modified use, syllabically, of 6. Even as it stands now, the Kabbalah, with its several methods, can only puzzle by offering several versions, it can never divulge the whole truth. The readings of even the first sentence of Genesis are several. To quote the author, it is made to read Bereshith bara Elohim, etc., in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, wherein Elohim is a plural nominative to a verb in the third person singular. Nachmans called attention to the fact that the text might suffer the reading, Bereshith bara Elohim etc., in the head, source or beginning, created itself, or developed, gods, the heavens, and the earth, really a more grammatical rendering. Ibid, and yet we are forced to believe the Jewish monotheism. The original number of letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The characters of the Hebrew text of the sacred scroll were divided into classes, in which the characters of each class were interchangeable, whereby one form might be exchanged for another to carry a modified signification, both by letter, and picture, and number. Siffard shows the modified form of the very ancient Hebrew alphabet in the Old Coptic by this law of interchange of characters. 7. This law of permitted interchange of letters is to be found quite fully set forth in the Hebrew dictionaries. Though recognized, it is very perplexing and hard to understand, because we have lost the specific use and power of such interchange. Just so. In the second place, these characters stood for numbers to be used for numbers as we use specific number signs, though also there is very much to prove that the old Hebrews were in possession of the so-called Arabic numerals, as we have them, from the straight line 1 to the 0 character, together making 1 plus 9 equals 10. In the third place, it is said, and it seems to be proved, that these characters stood for musical notes, so that, for instance, the arrangement of the letters in the first chapter of Genesis, can be rendered musically or by song. 6. Another law of the Hebrew characters was that only the consonantal signs were characterized, the vowels were not characterized, but were supplied. If one will try it, he will find that a consonant of itself cannot be made vocal without the help of a vowel. 9. Therefore, the consonants made the framework of a word, but to give it life or utterance into the air, so as to impart the thought of the mind, and the feelings of the heart, the vowels were supplied. Now, even if we suppose, for argument's sake, that the framework, i.e., the consonants of the Pentateuch are the same as in the days of Moses, what changes must have been effected with those scrolls written in such a poor language as the Hebrew, with its less than 2 dozens of letters when rewritten time after time, and its vowels and points supplied in ever new combinations. No two minds are alike, and the feelings of the heart change. What could remain, we ask, of the original writings of Moses, if such ever existed, when they had been lost for nearly 800 years and then found when every remembrance of them must have disappeared from the minds of the most learned, and Hilkiah has 7 before Siffard can hope to have his hypothesis accepted. However, he will have to prove that, a. the Israelites had an alphabet of their own when the ancient Egyptians or Copts had as yet none, and, b. that the Hebrew of the later scrolls is the Hebrew or mystery language of Moses, which the secret doctrine denies. 8. Not the Hebrew helped by the Masoretic signs, at all events. See further on, how. Ever. 9. And therefore as the vowels were furnished ad libitum by the Masoretes, they could make of a word what they liked. Them rewritten by Shaphan, the scribe. When lost again, they are rewritten again by Ezra. Lost once more in 168 BC, the volume or scrolls were again destroyed, and when finally they reappear, we find them dressed in their Masoretic disguise. We may know something of Ben Chajim, who published the Masorah of the scrolls. In the 15th century, we can know nothing of Moses, this is certain, unless we become initiates of the Eastern school. Aaron's, when speaking of the letters so arranged in the Hebrew sacred scrolls that they were of themselves musical notes, had probably never studied Aryan Hindu music. In the Sanskrit language there is no need to so arrange letters in the sacred alas that they should become musical. For the whole Sanskrit alphabet and the Vedas, from the first word to the last, are musical notations reduced to writing, and the two are inseparable. 10. As Homer distinguished between the language of gods and the language of men, so did the Hindus. The Devanagari, the Sanskrit character, is the speech of the gods, and Sanskrit the divine language. 12. As to the Hebrew, let the modern Isaiah sigh, woe is me, and confess that which the newly discovered mode of language, Hebrew metrology, veiled under the words of the sacred text, has now clearly shown. Read the Source of Measures, read all the other able treatises on the subject by the same author. And then the reader will find that with the utmost goodwill and incessant efforts covering many years of study, that laborious scholar, having penetrated under the mask of the system, can find in it little more than pure anthropomorphism. In man, and on man, alone, rests the whole scheme of the Kabbalah, and to man and his functions, on however enlarged a scale, everything in it is made to apply. Man, as the archetypal man or atom, is made to contain the whole Kabbalistic system. He is the great symbol and shadow, thrown by the manifested 10c Theosophist, November, 1879, article Hindu Music, p. 47 1 Thes 14. 289, 290. 12. The Sanskrit letters are 3 times as numerous as the poor 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. They are all musical and are read, or rather chanted, according to a system given in very old Tantra works, see Tantra Shastras, and are called Deva Nagari, the speech or language of the gods. And since each answers to a numeral, and has therefore a far larger scope for expression and meaning, it must necessarily be far more perfect and far older than the Hebrew, which followed the system, but could apply it only in a very limited way. If either of the two languages were taught to humanity by the gods, surely it is rather Sanskrit the perfect of the most perfect languages on earth than Hebrew, the roughest and the poorest. For once we believe in a language of divine origin, we can hardly believe at the same time that angels or gods or any divine messenger should have selected the inferior in preference to the superior. Cosmos, itself the reflection of the impersonal and ever incomprehensible principle, and this shadow furnishes by its construction the personal grown out of the impersonal, a kind of objective and tangible symbol of everything visible and invisible in the universe. As the first cause was utterly unknown and unnameable, such names as were adopted as most sacred, in Bible and Kabbalah, and commonly made applicable to the divine being, were after all not so, but were mere manifestations of the unknowable, such in a cosmic or natural sense, as could become known to man. Hence these names were not so sacred as commonly held, inasmuch as with all created things they were themselves but names or enunciations of things known. As to metrology, instead of a valuable adjunct to the biblical system, the entire text of the Holy Writ in the Mosaic books is not only replete with it as a system, but the system itself is that very thing, in esse, from the first to the last word. For instance, the narratives of the first day, of the 6 days, of the 7th day, of the making of Adam, male and female, of Adam in the garden, of the formation of the woman out of the man, of the genealogy of Ararat, of the ark, of Noah with his dove and raven, of Abram's travel from Ur into Egypt before Pharaoh, of Abram's life, of the three covenants, of the construction of the tabernacle and the dwelling of Jehovah, of the famous 603,550 as the number of men capable of bearing arms. The exodus out of Egypt, and the like all are but so many modes of enunciation of the system of geometry, of applied number ratios, of measures, and their various applications. And the author of Hebrew metrology ends by saying, whatever may have been the Jewish mode of complete interpretation of these books, the Christian Church has taken them for what they show on their first face, and that only. The Christian Church has never attributed to these books any property beyond this, and herein has existed its great error. But the Western European Kabbalists, and many of the American, though luckily not all, claim to correct this error of their church. How far do they succeed, and where is the evidence of their success? Read all the volumes published on the Kabbalah in the course of this century, and if we accept a few volumes issued recently in America, it will be found that not a single Kabbalist has penetrated even skin deep below the surface of that first face. Their digests are pure speculation and hypotheses and no more. One bases his glosses upon Ragan's Masonic revelations, another takes Fabre d'Olivet for his prophet, this writer having never been a Kabbalist, though he was a genius of wonder, full, almost miraculous, erudition, and a polyglot linguist greater than whom there was since his day none, even among the philologists of the French Academy, which refused to take notice of his work. Others, again, believe that no greater Kabbalist was born among the sons of men than the late Eliphas Levi, a charming and witty writer, who, however, has more mystified than taught in his many volumes on magic. Let not the reader conclude from these statements that real, learned Kabbalists are not to be found in the Old and New worlds. There are initiated occultists, who are Kabbalists, scattered hither and thither, most undeniably, especially in Germany and Poland. But these will not publish what they know, nor will they call themselves Kabbalists. The Sodalian oath of the third degree holds good now as ever. But there are those who are pledged to no secrecy. Those writers are the only ones on whose information the Kabbalists ought to rely, however incomplete their statements from the standpoint of a full revelation, i.e., of the sevenfold esoteric meaning. It is they who care least for those secrets after which alone the modern Hermetist and Kabbalist is now hungering, such as the transmutation into gold, and the elixir of life, or the philosopher's stone for physical purposes. For all the chief secrets of the occult teachings are concerned with the highest spiritual knowledge. They deal with mental states, not with physical processes and their transformations. In a word, the real, genuine Kabbalah, the only original copy of which is contained in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, pertains to, and teaches about, the realm of spirit, not that of matter. What, then, is the Kabbalah in reality, and does it afford a revelation of such higher spiritual mysteries? The writer answers most emphatically no. What the Kabbalistic keys and methods were, in the origin of the Pentateuch and other sacred scrolls and documents of the Jews now no longer extant, is one thing, what they are now is quite another. The Kabbalah is a manifold language, moreover, one whose reading is determined by the dead letter-faced text of the record to be deciphered. It teaches and helps one to read the esoteric real meaning hidden under the mask of that dead letter. It cannot create a text or make one find in the document under study that which has never been in it from the beginning. The Kabbalah such as we have it now is inseparable from the text of the Old Testament, as remodeled by Ezra and others. And as the Hebrew Scriptures, or their contents, have been repeatedly altered, notwithstanding the ancient boast that not one letter in the sacred scroll, not an iota, has ever been changed, so no Kabbalistic methods can help us by reading in it anything besides what there is in it. He who does it is no Kabbalist, but a dreamer. Lastly, the profane reader should learn the difference between the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic works, before he is made to face other arguments. For the Kabbalah is no special volume, nor is it even a system. It consists of 7 different systems applied to 7 different interpretations of any given esoteric work or subject. These systems were always transmitted orally by one generation of initiates to another, under the pledge of the Sotelian oath, and they have never been recorded in writing by anyone. Those who speak of translating the Kabbalah into this or another tongue may as well talk of translating the wordless signal chants of the Bedouin brigands into some particular language. Kabbalah, as a word, is derived from the root kbi, kabel, to hand over, or to receive oralv. It is erroneous to say, as Kenneth Mackenzie does in his Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, that the doctrine of the Kabbalah refers to the system handed down by oral transmis. Zion, and is nearly allied to tradition, for in this sentence the first proposition only is true, while the second is not. It is not allied to tradition but to the seven veils or the seven truths orally revealed at initiation. Of these methods, pertaining to the universal pictorial languages, meaning by pictorial any cipher, number, symbol, or other glyph that can be represented, whether objectively or subjectively, mentally, three only exist at present in the Jewish system. 18 Thus, if Kabbalah as a word is Hebrew, the system itself is no more Jewish than is sunlight, it is universal. On the other hand, the Jews can claim the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, Sefer Geni Utah, and a few others, as their own undeniable property and as Kabbalistic works. HPB 1-3 of these three, not one can be made to apply to purely spiritual metaphysics. One divulges the relations of the sidereal bodies to the terrestrial, especially the human, the other relates to the evolution of the human races and the sexes, the third to cosmotheogony and is metrological. Theosophist. November 1887 Tetragrammaton. I would advise all in general that they would take into serious consideration the true and genuine ends of knowledge, that they seek it not either for pleasure or contention, or contempt of others, or for profit, or for fame, or for honor and promotion, or such like adulterate or inferior ends, but for merit and emolument of life, that they may regulate and perfect the same in charity. Bacon. I end the present article. I shall carry no coals to Newcastle. This means that I do not propose to teach learned Brahmins the mysteries of their religious philosophy, but will take for my subject a few things from the universal Kabbalah. The former, once placed upon polemical grounds, is an awkward adversary to fight. Unless one has instead of a head an encyclopedia crammed with quotations, figures, numbers, and verses scattered throughout crores of pages, such polemics will be more injurious than useful. Each of the disputants will find himself with the same number of adherents to his views as he had before, as neither will convince a single man from the party opposed to him. Repeating with Sir T. Brown that I envy no man that knows more than myself, but pity them that know less, I will deal now with questions I am thoroughly conversant with, and in support of which I can quote good authorities. Having studied the Kabbalah, for nearer 40 than 30 years, I may perhaps be allowed to regard the Zohar as a legitimate ground for me to stand upon. This, however, will be no discussion, but simply a few statements of facts. 4 names and teachings from the Kabbalah have been brought forward to oppose our septenary doctrine. We are told that the Tetragrammaton is in the way of a final union with the Logos. Because his mystic constitution, as represented by the sacred tetragram, has not a septenary basis. 2. That it is one of the oldest directions of the ancient wisdom religion that the macrocosm one should be interpreted accord one just so. Makuth is the 10th Sephiroth, but as the bride of Miro Prosopis or Tetragrammaton, who is hexameros Makuth, or the material limb, is the 7th. She. To the plan revealed by Makuth. 3. That, a. Shekinah is an androgyne power, and, b. that she should be accepted as a guide to the interpretation of the constitution of the microcosm. 4. That its, Shekinah's, male form is the figure of man seen on the mysterious throne in the vision of Ezekiel. 3.1. I am afraid none of the above statements are correct. I am compelled to say that each and all are entirely erroneous. My authorities for saying so will be the 3 chief books of the Zohar, the Book of Concealed Mystery, and the 2 Assemblies, the Greater and the Lesser, as also the Kabbalah of Nor von Rosenroth, 8. The Sefer Yetzirah, with its commentaries, and The Ashmetzareth, containing a key to the Kabbalistical symbolism, and all supplemented with various codices. An axiom echoed from the hoariest antiquity teaches us that the first step to knowledge is to know and to confess that we are ignorant. I must have taken this step, for I fully realize how very ignorant I am in many things, and confess how little I know. Nevertheless, what I know, I do know. And perhaps, were I wiser, I ought to be glad to know so little, because if ignorance is the curse of God, as Shakespeare has it, too much of knowledge, when wisdom is too weak to guide her, is like a headstrong horse that throws the rider. In this particular case, however, I have no fear of being thrown out of my stirrups. I venture even to say that it is quite impossible, with the Zohar before one's eyes and its, just, 170 passages of references and several hundreds of comments and glosses upon the real meaning of Tetragrammaton alone. Meanwhile, as no man knoweth all errare humanum est, and as none of us, so far as I know, has reached the glorified position of an omniscient Buddha or a Sankaracharya, it is but just that we should compare notes and unveil that which can be lawfully unveiled. Hence I shall endeavor to show the true nature of the Tetragrammaton and prove its 4 letters to be a mere glyph, is the 4th letter of IHVH, or he, but the logos, or son, is only the letter V, Vav, as will be shown. To Theosophist, August, 1887. Pages 700 and 705. 3 now translated by S. Liddell McGregor Mathers, FTS. See his Kabalah Unveiled. A mask to conceal metaphysically its connection with, and relation to, the supernal and the inferior worlds. I will give nothing of my own speculations or knowledge, which are my personal property, the fruitage of my studies, and with which, therefore, the public has nothing to do. I shall only show what the Tetragrammaton is said to be in the Zohar, and as explained to the writer personally by a Hebrew-initiated rabbi in Palestine and made very plain to every advanced Kabbalist. The Tetragrammaton is called in the Kabbalah by various names. It is IHVH, the microprosopus, in distinction to AHIH, the macroprosopus. It is the lesser face, a reflection, tainted with matter or makuth, its bride, the Mother Earth, of the vaster, rather limitless face, therefore he is the antithesis of macroprosopus. But who, or what is macroprosopus, itself? 2. It is not Ansoph the non-existent, or non-being, no more than is Tetragrammaton, for both AHIH and IHVH are glyphs of existence, and symbols of terrestrial androgynous, as well as male and female life. Both are therefore mixed with Makuth, Hva, the mother of all that lives, and cannot be confounded in our spiritual perceptions with Ihati, the one absolute Esse, or Beiness, as some call it, though rabbis have tried hard to have the mantle fall upon their exoteric god. They are reflections of the Ansoph, the Hebrew Parabrahmam, for Ansoph is negative, and they, actual, positive life, therefore Maya or illusion. This is proven clearly by their dual presence in the cross, the oldest Plili symbol, thus IH, VH. As shown in the Kabalah Unveiled, p. 31. 4.3. There are 2 tetragrammatons in the Kabalah, or, rather he is dual, and for the matter of that, even triple, quater, for so old and so phallic, indeed, that leaving the ansated cross of Egypt aside, the terracotta discs called fusaeoles, found by Schliemann in abundance under the ruins of ancient Troy, are almost all in these 2 forms, the Indian svastika and the cross, the latter being svastika or Thor's hammer minus its 4 addition. Nary and a septenary. He becomes 9 and 13 only toward the end, when 13 or unity destroys the septenate symbolized by the 7 inferior, which 7, are the 7 kings of Edom, when the races are concerned, and the 7 lower Sephiroth when the human principles are referred to. The first tetragrammaton is the ever-concealed one, the Father himself, an emanation of the eternal light, thence not Ansoph. He is not the 4-lettered tetractys, but the square only, so to say, on a plane surface. It is the ideal geometrical figure formed of four imaginary lines, the abstract symbol of an abstract idea, or four mathematical lines enclosing a mathematical space which is equal to nothing enclosing nothing, as says Drive. Pratt, speaking of the triangle in his New Aspects of Life. A phantom veiled with four breadths. So much for Father Macroprosopus tetragrammaton. Whereas for Microprosopus tetragrammaton, the sun or logos, is the triangle in a square, the sevenfold cube, or as Mr. R. Skinner shows it, the six-faced cube unfolded becomes the seven-partitioned cross, when the androgyne separates into opposite sexes. See, in the words of a commentary on the secret doctrine, the circle emanates a light which becomes to our vision four-cornered, this unfolds and becomes seven. Here the circle is the first sephira, the kether or crown, the rishahavura, or whitehead, and the upper skull. It is not limitless, but temporary. In this phenomenal world it emanates the two lower sephiroth, Chakama and Bina, which are father-mother, and thus form the triangle, the first or upper triad of the sephirothal tree. This is the one or the monad of Pythagoras. But, it has emanated from the seven Elohim, male and female, who are al-angles. No need to explain that the Orientalists, who are unable to soar higher than the material plane, are nevertheless right, and that they have discovered one of the secret keys of exoteric religions, only, however, in asserting that the origin of the cross is the Irani and Pramantha, the stick and the perforated vessel for kindling fire of the ancient Brahmins. Prometheus stealing the sacred fire of creation to endow men with, has undeniably the origin of his name in Pramantha. The god Agni was celestial fire, only so long as he was hidden in his casket. No sooner had Madaraswan, the Rigvedic aerial being, forced him out of it for the benefit of the consuming Baitragas, than he became terrestrial fire, that of procreation, therefore phallic. The word matha or pramantha, we are told, has for its prefix adding the idea of robbing or stealing by force to that contained in the root matha of the verb mathami, or manthnami, to produce by friction. Hence Prometheus stealing the heavenly fire to degrade it, in one sense, on earth. He not only kindles the spark of life in the man of clay, but teaches him the mysteries of creation, which, from cryosacti, falls into the selfish act of procreation. Vide supertext. 5-4 in length or the vertical line, and 3 horizontally. See Theosophist, April. Called the upper father-mother. These are themselves the reflections of the female Holy Spirit, of which it is said in Sefer Jezira 1 is she, the Elohim of life. 6 How far yet from Ansof the all, are these numbers 7 of the Jewish Kabbalah, for they are in fact only secret numbers and glyphs. Microprose opus comes the fourth. Let anyone turn to plate 4 of Kabalah Denudata, ENG transaction, drawn by Mr. Mathers. Let him throw a glance at the symbolical deific forms placed in their relations to the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, and he will soon see that tetragrammaton or microprose opus, the lesser countenance, comes as the fourth. For clearer explanation I copy a small portion of the table. The 4 letters, the Sephiroth, the 4 worlds COC 3 degree E 2 60 foot V JZHUI yod H, the supernal He W Vav H, the inferior He 2 I macroprosopus Atzilith, the father, L the mother supernal, Uriah microprose opus Yetzirah, the bride of tetragram. Maiden, or Makuth slot archetypal W. Creative W, formative W, material W. It thus follows that although macroprosopus or kether, the crown of numbers, for it is the white head, or O, the cipher 8 is still removed from Ansof, being only its universal reflection or light, that it is not the tetragram. It is simply space, the boundless and the inscrutable, the supernal soil in which are concealed the archetypal ideas or forms of all, from which grows the root of cosmos, the universal tree of life in the creative world. The trunk of this tree are the father and mother, the second and third Sephiroth, or Chakama and Bina, respectively, Jehovah and Jehovah Elohim. 9-6 See the Kabbalah Unveiled. Introd. Pages 21 to 22. 7 Sephira means a numeral, it is one, and therefore singular, and the Sephiroth is a plural word, both of which have passed their names to our ciphers and are only the numbers of the creative hierarchies of the Dhyan Kohans. When the Elohim say let us make man, they have to work from the first to the last seventh, each endowing man with its own characteristic or principle. 8 The Hebrews had no word for a cipher or knot, hence the symbolism of a head or a round circle. 9 The student must bear in mind that Jehovah as a name is always male and female, or androgynous. It is a compound of two words Yah and Hova or Yahiv. Yah alone is masculine and active, therefore while the second Sephiroth Chakama, wisdom, is masculine and stands for Ab father, Bina, intelligence, is feminine, passive, and the father-mother belong to the creative world, because it is they who create, i.e., they are the bisexual material, the essence out of which the sun, the universe, is formed. This sun is microprosopus, or tetragrammaton. Why is he his four-lettered symbol? Whence the sacredness of this tetractys? Is it the ineffable name, or is it in any way connected with that unpronounceable name? I do not hesitate to answer in the negative. It is simply a blind, a symbol to veil the better the septinae constitution of man and his origin, and the various mysteries connected with it. Its name, the tetragram, is composed of 4 letters, but what is their secret, esoteric meaning? A Kabbalist will not hesitate to answer, read it numerically and compute the figures and numbers, and you will know. Now tetragrammaton is Father, Mother and the Son in one. It is Jehovah, whose name is written IHVH, and whose letters read symbolically according to the method revealed at the 4th initiation. 10 will read in 2 ways. It is composed of 2 masculine letters, 4, and 2 feminine characters, 2H, he, or the superior and the inferior H. The first is the supernal mother or the female Jehovah, as Bina, the other is the inferior H, or the 10th Sephiroth, Makuth, the foundation of matter. It is impossible to reveal in print the first reading, when it is written AH1H, beyond stating that exoterically it is connected with the I am that I am and with the Hei absolute Venus or Saturday. It can be read in 12 different ways, each sentence being symbolized in a sign of the zodiac. These transpositions are all made to refer to the mystery of being or existence as an abstract conception. But IHVH, the tetragrammaton of the formative world, and the spouse of the bride, whose kingdom is Asia or matter, though easy of explanation, is still more difficult to reveal in words, not on account of its sacredness, but rather of its indecency. I refer the reader for the plain symbolism of the 4 letters I, H, V, H, to Mr. R. Skinner's source of measures, P10, stands for AMA Mother, the great deep whose name is Jehovah. But the masculine name is symbolized by 1 letter alone, the Yod whose significance is entirely phallic. La tradition says that the last initiates into the 7 mysteries of microprosopus and the supreme Tet, number 9 and the letter T, the mystery of the 2 Amo, the 2 mothers, or the first and the second H. Of the word IHVH, were the 3 rabbis Schimeon, Abba, and Eliezer who, in the mysteries or Sod, had stood for Kether, Chakama, and Bina. See Zohar, the Lesser Holy Assembly. After their death the knolled edge of the 5 upper initiations was lost. Wherein that symbolism is given. Hindus see it daily in their linghas and yonis. It is Jehovah Zebaoth, the septenary Elohim concealed in the Holy of Holies, the Arga or Noah's Ark. Therefore, see plate in Kunv, he is the 7th Sephiroth among the superior septenary, as Makuth is the 7th of the inferior Sephiroth. Microprosopus is the 3rd letter V, Vav, and is called tetragram only, because he is one of the 4 letters which embrace the whole 9 Sephiroth but not Sephira. He is the secret septenary, which has been hitherto occult, and now is thoroughly unveiled on the tables which give the relations of the Sephiroth with the 10 divine names, the 10 archangels, their 10 orders, the planets, etc., demons, and the 10 archdevils Netzach, the 7th Sephiroth, whose name is exoterically firmness and victory. and esoterically something more, is called by its divine name Jehovah Sabaoth and corresponds with Haniel, human physical life, the androgyne Elohim with Venus Lucifer and Baal, and finally with the letter Vav or microprose opus, the Logos. All these belong to the formative world. They are all septonates, all associated with plastic formation and matter their bride. The latter is the inferior mother Ama, the woman with child of the 12th chapter of Revelation. Pursued by the great dragon, of wisdom. Who is this dragon? Is he the devil Satan, as we are taught to believe by the Church? Certainly not. He is the dragon of esoteric wisdom, who objects to the child born of the woman, the universe, for this child is its mankind, hence ignorance and illusion. But Michael and his angels, or Jehovah Sabaoth, the host, who refused to create as the seven passionless, mind-born, sons of Brahma did, because they aspire to incarnate as men in order to become higher than the gods, fight the dragon, conquer him, and the child of matter is born. The dragon of esoteric wisdom falls back into darkness indeed. 11:11 The key which opens this mystery is the seventh key, and relates to the seventh trumpet of the seventh angel, after whose blast St. John sees the woman and war in heaven. See Revelation, chapter 11, verse 15, and chapter 12, and try to understand. This allegory war in heaven has 6 other meanings, but this one is on the most material plane and explains the septenary principle. The woman is crowned with 12 stars and has the sun and moon to clothe her, twice 7, she being the universe. The dragon has 7 heads, 7 crowns, and 10 horns, another occult symbolism, and he is one of the 7 logoi. Perchance those who have reflected over the strange behavior of Narada may understand the analogy. Indeed, a Prajapat and a great Vedic rishi, and yet one who is ever interfering with the physical procreation of men, he seduces twice the thousands of Daksha's sons into remaining celibates and yogis, for this he is cursed. To be incarnated, born in a womb, and those who know something about numbers and cycles will now understand better the meaning of this allegory. Therefore, though I do not feel the slightest objection to any mystic willing to unite himself with the logos called tetragrammaton or microprose opus, one personally prefer a union with macroprose opus, on general principles, at any rate in the cycle of incarnation. After which, with the help of the perfect number, I hope to see the supernal light reducing to ashes not only my 7 inferiors, the microprose opus, but even the semblance of the 13 in the unity, that wage war with 7, Book of Cone. Mice. V27, and along with them the macroprosopical square. The letter Yod in the path of the 9th Sephira having a decidedly phallic signification, I decline union with the lower 7-fold and 7-letter Jehovah, and prefer pinning my faith to Ein Sof pure and simple, otherwise, why leave the bosom of Orthodox Church at all? As well join the Salvation Army at once, and sing blood, blood, the whole day. The logos which we recognize is not the tetragrammaton, but the crown, Kether, which has not to do with the material plane nor with macro, or microprose opus, but which is connected only with the pro-archetypal world. As it is said, by gematria AHIH equals IHV without the H, the symbol of Makuth, the bride, p. 31, closely associated with the letters of the tetragrammaton is that subject of the 4 cherubim, cherubs. Therefore the cherubim represent the powers of the letters of the tetragrammaton on the material plane. The cherubim are the living forms of the letters symbolized in the zodiac by Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio, pages 32 and 34, int. To Cab. Den. What the symbolism of these 4 animals represents in its turn on the material plane is again known. Taurus, whether called Siva's bull, the Egyptian bull Apis, the Zoroastrian bull killed by Ahriman, is ever a symbol of the seed of life, of generative as well as of the destructive force, while Scorpio is the symbol of sin, in the sexual sense, of evil and spiritual death, and Scorpio is the 4th number of tetragrammaton or Makuth. The mystery of the earthly and mortal man is after the mystery of the supernal and immortal one. In the form of the body is the tetragrammaton found. The head is, the letter Yod, the arms and shoulders are like, supernal, H, the body is V, and the legs are represented by the H, he, final. Kal. UNV. P34. In the scale of the number 7, the name of God is Rep. Presented with 7 letters. The scale is septenary, whatever way one looks from the first original or archetypal down to the 7th or temporal world. The tree of life has 7 branches and 7 fruits on it. In the book of concealed mystery, Brashith, the initial word in Genesis, reads Bereshith, he created the 6. Upon these depend all things which are below, v. 16, all things being synthesized by Machath, the 7th microprose opus. Microprose opus is formed of the 6 Sephiroth, 3 male and 3 female, v. 67, the limbs of the tetragrammaton are called the 6 members of microprose opus, and 6 is the numerical value of v, vav, his letter. When they, the limbs, touch the earth, they become 7, p. 32, cab. UNV, and verse 9 of COMM, XXII. In Book of Numbers. The whole book of concealed mystery is full of such sentences. The microprose opus is 6-fold. As he is formed of 6 Sephiroth which are called with Machath the inferior 7. These members are emanated from the first 6, creative, words pronounced. His 7th principle is represented by the 10th Sephiroth who is Eve in the exoteric system, or the inferior mother, hence the 7th week is called the millennium, the Sabbath, and also the 7th kingdom. Book of Kon. My STV 22. The Kabbalists have always made a difference not only between Ein Sof, the numberless and the inconceivable, but even between microprose opus and the lower tetragrammaton, the sun, thence, the logos. For, it is written in the Greater Holy Assembly, 83. And concerning this the children of Israel wished to know in their minds, like as it is written, Exodus 17. 7, is the tetragrammaton in the midst of us, or the negatively existent one. Where they distinguished between microprose opus who is called tetragrammaton, and between macroprose opus, who is called N, the negative existence, p. 121, but the Yod of the Ancient One is hidden and concealed. 73 INT. V 1152. We have learned that there were 10 companions, the Sephiroth, who entered into the Sod, mysteries of creation, and that 7 only came forth. V 1158. And when Rabbi Shimeon revealed the arcana, there were found none present there save those companions. V 1159. And Rabbi Shimeon called them the 7 eyes of tetragrammaton, like as it is written, Zach. 3:9, these are the 7 eyes of tetragrammaton. In the Bible the latter word is translated the Lord, which shows plainly that the Christians have accepted for their Lord God a 4th Sephirothal emanation and Thmali letter Vav. Is this the logos every initiate has to seek union with, as the ultimate result of his labors? Then, he may as well remain in his septenary mortal body as long as he can. With respect to the other obstacles, they are as incorrectly stated. The figure of the man on the throne in Ezekiel answers in esotericism to the archetypal plane, the world of Atzilith, not to the Skakina in Machath and Asia, on the material plane, as will become evident to anyone who analyzes the vision Kabbalis. Tikali. 4. Firstly, there are 4 clear divisions of the symbolism of the vision, namely, the form of the man, the throne on which he is seated, the firmament above the heads of the living creatures, and the living creatures themselves with their ophanim or wheels. These again clearly answer to the 4 Kabbalistical worlds or planes themselves, /e, Atzilith, the archetypal, the shadowy figure of the man, Brya, the creative, the throne, Yetzirah, the formative, the firmament J/O/, the material, the living creatures. These answer again to the 4 letters of the tetragram, thus, the uppermost point of yod in ihvh to the figure of the man, the h, he, to the throne, the v, vav, to the firmament, and the h final to the creatures. See Plate 9 of the Kabbalah Unveiled. The figure of the man is not the male form of Shekinah. Shekinah is not an androgyne power. 13 Shekinah is sexless or feminine if anything. It is primordial light emanating from the ever-concealed Ein Sof. In the archetypal world it is Sephirah, in the material and the formative it becomes Shekinah, the latent life and light of this inferior world of matter, the veil of Ein Sof and the divine presence on the path of Malkuth from the material to the higher worlds. She is the Budhai of the physical body, the soul or spark burning in the vessel, and after the vessel is broken, merging into the seventh, according to theosophical computation, and into the first Ormara Prosopis Kabbalistically. 12 I have consulted our brother Mr. S. Liddell McGregor Mathers whether any Kabbalist justified the idea that Shekinah was an androgyne power. He said no, it is sexless and is the divine presence *, see his Kabbalah, page 55. Note between verses 32 and 33. As it is the first ray from the concealed. 18 The plan revealed by Malkuth is given in the Book of Concealed Mystery, the Sefer Geni Out Ha, v. 31, as follows: the tree which is mitigated, that is, the path of the kingdom or Shekinah, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which in itself existeth from the judgment, but is mitigated by the bridegroom through the influx of mercies, resideth within the shells, because the kingdom hath its dominion over all things, and its feet descend into death. In its branches, in the inferior worlds, the birds lodge and build their nests, the souls and the angels have their place. Beneath it those animals which have power seek the shade, that is the shells, clipot, for in it every beast of the forest doth walk forth. P.S. CIV 20. This is the tree which hath two paths for the same end, namely, good and evil, because it is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it hath around it 7 columns, that is, the 7 palaces, and the 4 splendors, that is, the 4 animals, whirl around it, in 4 wheels, on their 4 sides, after the fourfold description of the chariot of Yuxjiel, Ezekiel. This tree has 7 branches, 14 on each of which are 4 leaves, and 3 fruits. Moreover, there is an evident analogy between the above verse in SD and chapter I-4 of Revelation. For the 7 churches of Asia are identical with the 7 palaces in Asia, or the material septenary place. The 7 stars which are in the right hand of the figure in the first chapter are not these 7 churches, but the 7 keys to them, and the 2-edged, androgyne, word which proceeds from his mouth is the yod of ihvh. This figure is the septenary tetragrammaton, the v, vav. 15 But this figure is a different thing altogether to the one which is on the throne in Ezekiel's vision. For the former, the figure in chapter I of Revelation, is on the plains of Yetzirah, the world of formation, the habitat of the angels who would not create, and the figure of Ezekiel is on the plain of Atzalal, and is De13Nor is Shekinah is Sephiroth, for she proceeds from, and is latent in the 10th Malkuth, and is destroyed with the latter. See 22, Book of Kon. Mist. The mistake has probably arisen from Shekinah's divine name being Adonai and the angelic cherubim. But no Kabbalist will give out in print the key to this. 1.4 SEE engraving from the Babylonian account of creation, by G. Smith, Chaldean account of Genesis, of the sacred tree, with figure on each side and serpent in the background. This engraving is taken from an early Babylonian cylinder, and represents the said tree with its 7 branches. 15 or Vav, whose number is 6 and symbolism a hook or crook, phallic. Scribed in the 4th chapter of the Apocalypse as the one who sat upon the throne. In order to be to bear the burden of the above statements, I have applied to Mr. S. L. McGregor Mathers, than whom there are few more learned Kabbalists in England, though I do not certainly agree with all his views. But on this question we are in almost full agreement. Our brother has kindly consented to give an opinion in writing, and this is how he distributes the Sephirothal tree. Kether Chakama Gabara Chisad Tiferet Had Netzach Yezid Makath. Here the figure on the throne in Ezekiel's vision refers to Kether, the throne, to Chakama and Bina, the world of Braya, whose alternative name is Corsia, the throne. The firmament is Microprose Opus, who consists of the 6 Sephiroth, Chisad, Gabara, Tifereth, Netzach, Had, and Yezid. Now Yezid is the path of ingress into Makath, or the created material world, and the Shekinah is the presence in Makath, the queenly presence, for Shekinah is feminine, and not androgynous. And the seal of the macrocosm, the 6-pointed star, the 16, is the emblem of Microprose Opus, the tetragrammaton, the Vav of IHVH, who stands within the 7 light-bearers of Makath, which are no other than the 7 last Sephiroth themselves, or 16. It is the seal of the macrocosm certainly, but it becomes that of microcosm only when the 5-pointed star is enclosed within it, for it is the latter which is properly the sign of Macroprose Opus. It is the Shakan Chakram, the will of Vishnu, and the Panchakan, pentagram. We would call the former the seal of Macroprose Opus only when the hexagram is surrounded by or within a circle, not otherwise. But this does not affect the question. The Kabalah of Nor von Rosenroth contains a good many errors, and other versions, especially the Latin translations, all made by Christians bent upon squeezing out nolens volens, a prophetic and Christian meaning, out of the Zohar more still. The 6 Sephiroth which compose Microprose Opus with Makath added as the 7th. 17. Nothing can be plainer, I believe. Whatever the transcendental, metaphysical speculations and interpretations, which, of course, can be satisfied with Tetrictus on the plane of the archetypal world, once that we descend into the world of the astral and of the phenomenally occult, we cannot have less than 7 principles upon which to base ourselves. I have studied the Kabbalah under 2 learned rabbis, one of whom was an initiate, and there was no difference between the 2 teachings, the esoteric Eastern and the Western, in this instance. Of course it is well known that anyone endowed with even a moderate dose of ingenuity can, if he has studied the 3 Kabbalistic modes of interpretation, especially the Notarican, make what he likes of the unpointed Hebrew words and letters. But the explanations I give require no Notarican, but simply a knowledge of the 7th esoteric key. With Masoretic points one can transform the astral Jehovah Zebaoth, and even Jehovah Elohim, into the one living and the highest God, the God of gods, whereas he is merely one of the formative and generative gods. A good instance of the above dishonesty is found in Mr. Mather's translation of Nor von Rosenroth's Kabbalah Denudata. He gives us 6 specimens of the various readings of the first word only, Bereshith, in Genesis. With the rules of Notarican, the opening sentence Bereshith bara Elali imeth hashemayim v'eth haaretz, or in the beginning God made the heaven and the earth, may be made to mean whatever one pleases, since the first and solitary word Bereshith is forced to yield 6 dogmatic teachings of the Latin Church. As shown by the aforesaid Kabbalist, Solomon Meir ben Moses, a convert to Roman Catholicism in 1665, who took the name of Prosper Ruggieri, succeeded in proving on strictly Notaricanist grounds that the said first word, Bereshith, revealed 6 Christian meanings. The first of these was the Son, the Spirit, the Father. Their Trinity, perfect unity. The third, ye shall worship my firstborn, my first, whose name is Jesus. The fifth, I will choose a virgin worthy to bring forth Jesus, and ye shall call her blessed. 17. The Sephragini Outha says concerning Makath, the Shekinah, or queenly presence, which is below, that is a path of the kingdom, namely, Makath, the 10th and last. Sephira, IC 32. The 6th is given in the footnote below. 16. The 2 others are repetitions. The same remarkable elasticity of interpretation is afforded in the esoteric texts of other nations. Each symbol and glyph having 7 keys to it, it follows that one party may be using one key to any subject under dispute, and then accuse another student who is using another key of deliberate misinterpretation. Such is not my policy, however. In esoteric matters I would rather seek conciliation than quarrel over mistakes made, whether real or imaginary, because the cause and the triumph of truth ought to be dearer to a true occultist and theosophist than petty successes over disputants. No one occultist, if he is true to his colors, can give out the meaning of all the 7 mysteries of wisdom even if he himself is acquainted with all, which would be a marvel, indeed. For those 7 mysteries in toto are known thoroughly only to the masters of wisdom, and those masters would hardly indulge in polemical discussions whether in newspaper or periodical. What is the use then of losing time and power over proving that one facet of the diamond shines with more light and brilliancy than its sister facet, instead of uniting all the forces to draw the attention of the profane to the radiance of the jewel itself? We students of the sacred science ought to help each other, encourage research and profit by our mutual knowledge, instead of unprofitably criticizing it to satisfy personal pride. This is how I look at it, for otherwise our enemies, who started by calling us humbugs on the sole strength of their sectarian and materialistic prejudices and bigotry, will be justified in reiterating their accusation on the ground of our mutual denunciations. Materialism is raising its ghastly head higher than ever. Knowledge, one of the scientific papers of London, gives us a foretaste of what is in store for the occultist. While reviewing the Kabalah Unveiled, it is loud in proclaiming the extraordinary intellectual vagaries of the Hebrew commentators on their scrip 18 in the Notaricon. Every letter of a word is taken for the initiator abbreviation of another word, so that from the letters of a word a sentence may be formed thus: from the letters of this word Berashith, I too could easily make a sentence which would read, beware. Rows are soon hatched in theosophy and then offer it as a divine warning and revelation, taking as my authority the Book of God. This reading would be as true, but more to the point than the 6th of Prosper Rugary's versions, for he made of Berashith Bogo Rat Sephamasatar Shagapide Shuathukdu, which, translated, reads I, God, will hide myself in cake, wafer, for ye shall eat Jesus, my body, and converted thereby, and forthwith, another Jew to Roman Catholicism. Tours. It crushes under the weight of its materialist contempt the idea from Dr. Ginsburg's essay on the Kabbalah that the mysteries of being were taught by the Almighty Himself to a select company of angels, who formed a theosophic school in paradise, and winds up by a tremendous point of mocking admiration, in parenthesis. This, on page 259 of Knowledge, September 1, 1887. On page 245, Mr. Edward Clodd offers us, instead of the teachings of the theosophic angels, those of the Darwinists of the Hegelian school, having surveyed a vast field in cosmos, the limits of which shade into the unlimited on all sides. This anti-Kabbalistic champion of modern science ends his vagaries by the following startling enunciation: we began with the primitive nebula, we end with the highest forms of consciousness. The story of creation is shown to be the unbroken record of the evolution of gas into genius. This shows how we stand with the men of modern science and how much we need all our forces to hold the materialists at bay. One word more and I have done. I am repeatedly asked to show my authority book, page and verse for the esoteric doctrine of the septenary. This is like saying to one in the midst of a desert, prove to me that water is full of infusoria when there is no microscope to be got. Better than anyone, those who make such a claim upon me, know that outside of the few places where secret manuscripts are stored for ages, no esoteric doctrines were ever written and plainly explained, otherwise they would have lost long ago their very name. There is such a thing as an unwritten Kabbalah, as well as a written one, even in the West. Many things are orally explained, and always have been. Nevertheless, hints and allusions to it are numerous and scattered throughout the exoteric scriptures, and the classification depends, of course, on the school that interprets it, and still more upon personal intuition and conception. The question is not whether there are 3, 5, or 7 colors in the rays of the spectrum, for everyone knows there are, in fact and nature, but one, the colorless white. And, though science discerns very plainly 7 prismatic rays as clear as are the 7 notes in the scale, yet, one has heard of very great men of science who insisted there were only 4 or 5 until it was found out that they were colorblind. ISIS unveiled and the Visishtadvaita correspondence Sir, R.P. attempts in the October number of our magazine to prove that I have taught in ISIS unveiled substantially the doctrine of Visishtadvaita, to which view I take exception. I am quite aware of the fact that ISIS is far from being as complete a work as, with the same materials, it might have been made by a better scholar, and that it lacks symmetry, as a literary production, and perhaps here and there accuracy. But I have some excuse for all that. It was my first book, it was written in a language foreign to me in which I had not been accustomed to write, the language was even more unfamiliar to certain Asiatic philosophers who rendered assistance, and, finally, Colonel Alcott, who revised the manuscript and worked with me throughout, was then in the years 1875 and 1876 almost entirely ignorant of Aryan philosophy, and hence unable to detect and correct such errors as I might so readily fall into when putting my thoughts into English. Still, despite all this, I think R.P.'s criticism is faulty. If I erred in making too little distinction between an impersonal God, or Parabrahm, and a personal God, I scarcely went to the length of confounding the one with the other completely. The pages, Vol. 2 216-17, and 153, and Pref. P2, that he relies upon, represent not my own doctrine but the ideas of others. The first 2 are quotations from Manu, and show what an educated Brahmin and a Buddhist might answer to Prof. Max Muller's affirmation that moksha and nirvana mean annihilation, while the third, Vol. 2 p. 153, is a defense and explanation of the inner sense of the Bible, as from a Christian mystic's standpoint. Of course this would resemble Visishtadvaitism, which, like Christianity, ascribes personal attributes to the universal principle. As for the reference to the preface, it seems that even when read in the dead-letter sense, the paragraph could only be said to reflect my personal opinion and not the esoteric doctrine. A skeptic in my early life, I had sought and obtained through the masters the full assurance of the existence of a principle, not personal God, a boundless and fathomless ocean of which my soul was a. ISIS unveiled and the Visishtadvaita drop. Like the Advaitis, I made no difference between my seventh principle and the universal spirit, or Parabrahm, nor did. Or do I believe in an individual, segregated spirit in me, as a something apart from the whole. And see, for proof, my remark about the omnipotence of man's immortal spirit, which would be a logical absurdity upon any theory of egoistic separation. My mistake was that throughout the whole work I indifferently employed the words Parabrahm and God to express the same idea, a venial sin surely, when one knows that the English language is so poor that even at this moment I am using the Sanskrit word to express one idea and the English one for the other. Whether it be orthodox Advaita or not, I maintain as an occultist, on the authority of the secret doctrine, that though merged entirely into Parabrahm, man's spirit while not individual per se, yet preserves its distinct individuality in Paranirvana, owing to the accumulation in it of the aggregates, or skandlayas that have survived after each death, from the highest faculties of the manas the most spiritual i.e., the highest and divinest aspirations of every personality follow Buddhi and the seventh principle into Devachan, Swarga, after the death of each personality along the line of rebirths, and become part and parcel of the monad. The personality fades out, disappearing before the occurrence of the evolution of the new personality, rebirth, out of Devachan, but the individuality of the spirit soul dear, what can be made out of this English, is preserved to the end of the great cycle, Mahamanvantara, when each ego enters Paranirvana, or is merged in Parabrahm. To our talpatic, or mole-like, comprehension the human spirit is then lost in the one spirit, as the drop of water thrown into the sea can no longer be traced out and recovered. But de facto it is not so in the world of immaterial thought. This latter stands in relation to the human dynamic thought, as, say, the visual power through the strongest conceivable microscope would to the sight of a half-blind man, and yet even this is a most insufficient simile. The difference is inexpressible in terms of foot-pounds. That such parabrahmic and paranirvanic spirits, or units, have and must preserve their divine, not human, individualities, is shown in the fact that, however long the night of Brahma or even the universal pralaya, not the local pralaya affecting some one group of worlds, yet, when it ends, the same individual divine monad resumes its majestic path of evolution, though on a higher, hundredfold perfected and more pure chain of earths. 34 Kabbalah and Kabalism than before, and brings with it all the essence of compound spiritualities from its previous countless rebirths. Spiral evolution, it must be remembered, is dual, and the path of spirituality turns, corkscrew-like, within and around physical, semi-physical, and superphysical evolution. But I am being tempted into details which had best be left for the full consideration which their importance merits to my forthcoming work, The Secret Doctrine. Theosophist, October, 1881. Stray thoughts on death and Satan. To the editor of the Theosophist. Madam, since you have published a posthumous letter of my master and beloved friend, the late Eliphas Levi, I think it would be agreeable to you to publish, if judged suitable, a few extracts of the many manuscripts in my possession, written expressly for, and given to, me by my ever-regretted master. To begin, I send you Stray Thoughts on Death and Satan from his pen. I cannot close this letter without expressing the deep indignation aroused in me by the base diatribes published in the London Spiritualist against your society and its members. Every honest heart is irritated at such unfair treatment, especially when proceeding from a man of honor as Mr. Harrison, editor of the Spiritualist, who admits in his journal anonymous contributions that are tantamount to libels. With the utmost respect, I remain, Madam, yours devotedly, Baron J. Spadalieri. Marseilles, July 29, 1881. Editor's note. It is with feelings of sincere gratitude that we thank Baron Spadalieri for his most valuable contribution. The late Eliphas Levi was the most learned Kabbalist and occultist of our age in Europe, and everything from his pen is precious to us, in so far as it helps us to compare notes with the Eastern occult doctrines and, by the light thrown upon both, to prove to the world of spiritualists and mystics, that the two systems, the Eastern Aryan, and the Western or the Chaldeo-Jaquish Kabbalah, are one in their principal metaphysical tenets. Only, while the Eastern occultists have never lost the key to their esotericism, and are daily verifying and elaborating their doctrines by personal experiments, and by the additional light of modern science, the Western or Jewish Kabbalists, besides having been misled for centuries by the introduction of foreign elements in it such as Christian dogmas, dead-letter interpretations of the Bible and have most undeniably lost the true key to the esoteric meaning of Simeon ben Jaquet's Kabbalah, and are trying to make up for the loss, by interpretations emanating from the depths of their imagination and inner consciousness. Such is evidently the case with J.K., the self-styled London adept, whose anonymous and powerless vilifications of the Theosophical Society and its members are pertinently regarded by Baron Spadalieri as tantamount to libels. But we have to be charitable. That poor descendant of the biblical Levites, as we know him to be in his pygmy efforts to upset the Theosophists, has most evidently fractured his brain against one of his own occult sentences. There is one especially in the Spiritualist, July 22, to which the attention of the mystically inclined is drawn further down, as this paragraph is most probably the cause of the sad accident which befell so handsome a head. Be it as it may, but it now disables the illustrious J.K. from communicating scientifically his knowledge, and forces him at the same time to remain, as he expresses it, in an incommunicable ecstatic state. For it is in no other state that our great modern adept, the literary man of such a caliber * that to suspect him of ignorance becomes equal, in audacity, to throwing suspicion upon the virtue of Caesar's wife, could possibly have written the following lines, intended by him, we believe, as a lucid and clear exposition of his own psycho-Kabbalistic lore, as juxtaposed to the hard words, outlandish verbiage, moral and philosophical platitudes, and jawbreakers of the learned Theosophists. These are the gems of occult wisdom of the illustrious Jewish Kabbalist who, like a bashful violet, hides his occult learning under two modest initials. To accuse a literary man of my caliber of ignorance, is as amusing a mistake as it would have been to charge Porson of ignorance of Greek, he writes in the Spiritualist of Jew. Y8. The occult is my special subject, and there is but little that I do not know, he adds. Now, the above sentence settles the question at rest with us. Not only an adept but no layman or profane of the most widely recognized intellect and ability, would have ever dared, under the penalty of being henceforth and forever regarded as the most ridiculously conceited of /scbus heroes, to use such a sentence. When speaking of himself, so stupidly arrogant, and cowardly impertinent has he shown himself behind the shield of his initials to far better and more worthy men than himself, in his transparent attacks upon them in the above-named spiritualist, that it is the first and certainly the last time that we do him the honor of noticing him in these columns. Our journal has a nobler task, we trust, than to be polemizing with those, whom in vulgar parlance the world generally terms bullies. Theos. In every human creature there lies latent in the involitional part of the being a sufficient quantity of the omniscient, the absolute. To induce the latent absolute, which is the involitional part of our volitional conscious being, to become manifest, it is essential that the volitional part of our being should become latent. After the preparatory purification from acquired depravities, a kind of introversion has to take place, the involitional has to become volitional, by the volitional becoming involitional. When the conscious becomes semi-unconscious, the, to us, formerly unconscious becomes fully conscious. The particle of the omniscient that is within us, the vital and growing, sleepless, involitional, occult or female principle being allowed to express itself in the volitional, mental, manifest, or masculine part of the human being, while the latter remains in a state of perfect passivity, the two formerly dissevered parts become reunited as one holy, perfect being, and then the divine manifestation is inevitable. Very luckily, J.K. gives us himself the key to this grandiloquent gush. Necessarily, he adds, this is only safely practicable while living in uncompromisingly firm purity, for otherwise there is danger of unbalancement, insanity, or a question. Able form of mediumship. The italics are ours. Evidently with our immaculate adept the involitional, occult, or female principle was not allowed to express itself in the volitional, mental, manifest, or masculine part of his being, and behold the results. For the edification of our Hindu readers, who are unprogressive enough to refuse reading the lucubrations of J.K., or follow the mental grand trapeze performed by this remarkable adept on the columns of the Spiritualist, we may add that in the same article he informs his English readers that it is Hindu mystification, acting on Western credulity, which brought out the Theosophical Society. Hindu philosophy according to that great light of the 19th century is no philosophy but rather mysticism. Following the track of the mystifying and mystified Hindus, they, the Theosophists, consider the four above faculties, cities of Krishna, Anima, Mahima, Lagima and Garima to be the power we, have to strive for. Indeed, what a ludicrous confusion of effect with cause. The fracture of the brain must have been serious indeed. Let us hope that timely and repeated lotions of witch hazel or the universal magic bomb will have its good effects. Meanwhile, we turn the attention of our Hindu readers and students of occultism to the identity of the doctrines taught by Eliphas Levi, who, too, is contemptuously sneered at, and sent by the adept to keep company with brothers, yogis, and fakirs, in every essential and vital point with those of our Eastern initiates. Death by the late Eliphas Levi. Death is the necessary dissolution of imperfect combinations. It is the reabsorption of the rough outline of individual life into the great work of universal life. Only the perfect is immortal. It is a bath in oblivion. It is the fountain of youth where on one side plunges old age, and whence on the other issues infancy. One death is the transfiguration of the living, Corpses are but the dead leaves of the tree of life which will still have all its leaves in the spring. The resurrection of men resembles eternally these leaves. Perishable forms are conditioned by immortal types. All who have lived upon earth, live there still in new exemplars of their types, but the souls which have surpassed their type receive elsewhere a new form based upon a more perfect type. As they mount ever on the ladder of worlds, the bad exemplars are broken, and their matter returned into the general mass. 8. Our souls are as it were a music, of which our bodies are the instruments. The music exists without the instruments, but it cannot make itself heard without a material intermediary. The immaterial can neither be conceived nor grasped. Man in his present existence only retains certain predispositions from his past existences. Evocations of the dead are but condensations of memory, the imaginary coloration of the shades. To evoke those who are no longer there, is but to cause their types to reissue from the one rebirth of the ego after death. The Eastern, and especially Buddhistic doctrine of the evolution of the new, out of the old ego. Et Theos. 2. From one loka to the other, from a positive world of causes and activity, to a negative world of effects and passivity. Et Theos. 3. Into cosmic matter, when they necessarily lose their self-consciousness or individually, or are annihilated, as the Eastern Kabbalists say. Et Theos. Imagination of nature. For to be in direct communication with the imagination of nature, one must be either asleep, intoxicated, in an ecstasy, cataleptic, or mad. The eternal memory preserves only the imperishable, all that passes in time belongs of right to oblivion. The preservation of corpses is a violation of the laws of nature, it is an outrage on the modesty of death, which hides the works of destruction, as we should hide those of reproduction. Preserving corpses is to create phantoms in the imagination of the earth. 5. The specters of the nightmare, of hallucination, and fear, are but the wandering photographs of preserved corpses. It is these preserved or imperfectly destroyed corpses, which spread, amid the living, plague, cholera, contagious diseases, sadness, skepticism and disgust of life. 6. Death is exhaled by death. The cemeteries poison the atmosphere of towns, and the miasma of corpses blight the children even in the bosoms of their mothers. Near Jerusalem in the valley of Gehenna a perpetual fire was maintained for the combustion of filth and the carcasses of animals, and it is to this eternal fire that Jesus alluded when he says that the wicked shall be cast into Gehenna, signifying that dead souls will be treated as corpses. The Talmud says that the souls of those who have not believed in immortality will not become immortal. It is faith only which gives personal immortality. 7. Science and reason can only affirm the general immortality. The mortal sin is the suicide of the soul. This suicide would occur if the man devoted himself to evil with the full strength of his mind, with a perfect knowledge of good and evil, and an entire liberty of action which seems impossible in practice, but which is possible in theory, because the essence of an independent personality is an unconditioned liberty. The divinity imposes, for to ardently desire to see a dead person is to evoke the images of that person, to call it forth from the astral light or ether wherein rest photograph the images of the past. That is what is being partially done in the seance rooms. The spiritualists are unconscious necromancers. Et Theos. 5. To intensify these images in the astral or sidereal light. Et Theos. 6. People begin intuition ally to realize the great truth, and societies for burning bodies and crematories are now started in many places in Europe. Et Theos. 7. Faith and willpower. Immortality is conditional, as we have ever stated. It is the reward of the pure and good. The wicked man, the material sensualist only survives. He who appreciates but physical pleasures will not and cannot live in the hereafter as a self-conscious entity. Et Theos. Nothing upon man, not even existence. Man has a right to withdraw himself even from the divine goodness, and the dogma of eternal hell is only the assertion of eternal free will. God precipitates no one into hell. It is men who can go there freely, definitively, and by their own choice. Those who are in hell, that is to say, amid the gloom of evil ate and the sufferings of the necessary punishment, without having absolutely so willed it, are called to emerge from it. This hell is for them only a purgatory. The damned completely, absolutely, and without respite, is Satan, who is not a rational existence, but a necessary hypothesis. Satan is the last word of the creation. He is the end infinitely emancipated. He willed to be like God, of which be is the opposite. God is the hypothesis necessary to reason, Satan the hypothesis necessary to unreason, asserting itself as free will. To be immortal in good, one must identify oneself with God; to be immortal in evil, with Satan. These are the two poles of the world of souls. Between these two poles vegetate and die without remembrance the useless portion of mankind. Editor's note. This may seem incomprehensible to the average reader, for it is one of the most abstruse of the tenets of occult doctrine. Nature is dual, there is a physical and material side, as there is a spiritual and moral side to it, and there is both good and evil in it, the latter the necessary shadow to its light. To force oneself upon the current of immortality, or rather to secure for oneself an endless series of rebirths as conscious individualities, says the Book of Kyote Vol. XXXI, one must become a co-worker with nature, either for good or for bad, in her work of creation and reproduction, or in that of destruction. It is but the useless drones, which she gets rid of, violently ejecting and making them perish by the millions as self-conscious entities. Thus, while the good and the pure strive to reach Nibbana, nirvana, or that state of absolute existence and absolute consciousness which, in the world of finite perceptions, is non-existence and consciousness, the wicked will seek, on the contrary, a series of lives as conscious, definite existences or beings, preferring to be ever suffering under the law of retributive ate, that is to say, they are reborn in a lower world which is neither hell nor any theological purgatory, but a world of nearly absolute matter and one preceding the last. One in the circle of necessity from which there is no redemption, for there reigns absolute spiritual darkness. Book of Kyote. Ed Theos. Justice, rather than give up their lives as portions of the integral, universal whole. Being well aware that they can never hope to reach the final rest in pure spirit, or nirvana, they cling to life in any form, rather than give up that desire for life, or tanha, which causes a new aggregation of skandhas or individuality to be reborn. Nature is as good a mother to the cruel bird of prey as she is to the harmless dove. Mother Nature will punish her child, but since he has become her co-worker for destruction, she cannot eject him. There are thoroughly wicked and depraved men, yet as highly intellectual and acutely spiritual for evil, as those who are spiritual for good. The egos of these may escape the law of final destruction or annihilation for ages to come. That is what Eliphas Levi means by becoming immortal in evil, through identification with Satan. I would thou wert cold or hot, says the vision of the Revelation to St. John, 3:15-16. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. The Revelation is an absolutely Kabbalistic book. Heat and cold are the two poles, i.e., good and evil, spirit and matter. Nature spurs the lukewarm or the useless portion of mankind out of her mouth, i.e., annihilates them. This conception that a considerable portion of mankind may after all not have immortal souls, will not be new even to European readers. Coleridge himself likened the case to that of an oak tree bearing, indeed, millions of acorns, but acorns of which under normal conditions not one in 1,000 ever developed into a tree, and suggested that as the majority of the acorns failed to develop into a new living tree, so possibly the majority of men fail to develop into a new living entity after this earthly death. To Satan, Satan is merely a type, not a real personage. It is the type opposed to the divine type, the necessary foil to this in our imagination. It is the factitious shadow which renders visible to us the infinite light of the divine. If Satan was a real personage, then would there be two gods, and the creed of the Manichaeans would be a truth. Satan is the imaginary conception of the absolute in evil, a conception necessary to the complete affirmation of the liberty of the human will, which, by the help of this imaginary absolute seems able to equilibrate the entire power even of God. It is the boldest, and perhaps, the sublimest of the dreams of human pride. You shall be as gods knowing good and evil, saith the allegorical serpent in the Bible. Truly to make evil a science is to create a god of evil, and if any spirit can eternally resist God, there is no longer one God but two gods. To resist the infinite, infinite force is necessary, and two infinite forces opposed to each other must neutralize each other. 9. If resistance on the part of Satan is possible, the power of God no longer exists, God and the devil destroy each other, and man remains alone, he remains alone with the phantom of his gods. The hybrid Sphinx, the winged bull, which poises in its human hand a sword of which the wavering lightnings drive the human imagination from one error to the other, and from the despotism of the light, to the despotism of the darkness. The history of mundane misery is but the romance of the war of the gods, a war still unfinished, while the Christian world still adores a god in the devil, and a devil in God. The antagonism of powers is anarchy in dogma. Thus to the Church which affirms that the devil exists the world replies with a terrifying logic, then God does not exist, and it is vain to seek escape from this argument to invent the supremacy of a God who would permit a devil to bring about the damnation of men. Such a permission would be a monstrosity, and would amount to complicity, and the God that could be an accomplice of the devil, cannot be God. The devil of dogmas is a personification of atheism. The devil of philosophy is the exaggerated ideal of human free will. The real or physical devil is the magnetism of evil. Raising the devil is but realizing for an instant this imaginary personality. This involves the exaggeration in oneself beyond bounds of the perversity of madness by the most criminal and senseless acts. The result of this operation is the death of the soul through madness, and often the death of the body even, lightning struck, as it were, by a cerebral congestion. 9. An evil being infinite and eternal, for it is coeval with matter, the logical deduction would be that there is neither God nor devil as personal entities, only one uncreated, infinite, immutable, and absolute principle or law, evil or devil the deeper it falls into matter, good or God as soon as it is purified from the latter and re-becomes again pure unalloyed spirit or the absolute in its everlasting, immutable subjectivity. Et Theos. The devil ever importunes, but nothing ever gives in return. St. John calls it the beast, la bête, because its essence is human folly, la bêtise humaine. Philippos Levi's, Bond's Memories, Creed, and that of his disciples. We believe in a God principle, the essence of all existence, of all good and of all justice, inseparable from nature which is its law and which reveals itself through intelligence and love. We believe in humanity, daughter of God, of which all the members are indissolubly connected one with the other so that all must co-operate in the salvation of each, and each in the salvation of all. We believe that to serve the divine essence it is necessary to serve humanity. We believe in the reparation of evil, and in the triumph of good in the life eternal. Fiat. A posthumous publication. We are glad to lay before our readers the first of a series of unpublished writings of the late Eliphas Levi, ABB Pound Louis Constant, one of the great masters of occult sciences of the present century in the West. An ex-Catholic priest, he was unfrocked by the ecclesiastical authorities at Rome, who tolerate no belief in God, devil, or science outside the narrow circle of their circumscribed dogma, and who anathematize every creed-crushed soul that succeeds in breaking its mental bondage. Just in the ratio that knowledge increases, faith diminishes, consequently, those that know the most, always believe the least, said Carlyle. Eliphas Levi knew much, far more than the privileged few even among the greatest mystics of modern Europe, hence, he was traduced by the ignorant many. He had written these ominous words. The discovery of the great secrets of true religion and of the primitive science of the Magi, revealing to the world the unity of the universal dogma, annihilates fanaticism by scientifically explaining and giving the reason for every miracle, and these words sealed his doom. Religious bigotry persecuted him for disbelieving in divine miracle, bigoted materialism for using the word miracle and prodigy, dogmatic science, for attempting to explain that which she could not yet explain herself, and in which, therefore, she disbelieved. The author of the Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, of the Science of Spirits, and of the Key to the Great Mysteries, died, as his famous predecessors in the occult arts, Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, and many others did, a pauper. Of all the parts of the world, Europe is the one which stones her true prophets the most cruelly, while being led by the nose by the false ones the most successfully. Europe will prostrate herself before any idol, provided it flatters her preconceived hobbies and loudly appeals to, and proclaims her superior intelligence. Christian Europe will believe in divine and demoniacal miracles and in the infallibility of a book condemned out of its own mouth, and consisting of old exploded legends. Spiritualistic Europe will fall into ecstasies before the eidolon of a medium when it is not a sheet and a clumsy mask, and remain firmly convinced of the reality of the apparitions of ghosts and the spirits of the dead. Scientific Europe will laugh Christians and spiritualists to scorn, destroy all and build nothing, limiting herself to preparing arsenals of materials which she knows not in most cases what to do with, and whose inner nature is still a mystery for her. And then all the three, agreeing in everything else to disagree, will combine their efforts to put down a science hoary with age and ancient wisdom, the only science which is capable of making religion scientific, science religious, and of ridding human intelligence of the thick cobwebs of conceit and superstition. The article that follows is furnished to us by an esteemed fellow of the Theosophical Society, and a pupil of Eliphas Levi. Having lost a dear friend who committed suicide, the great master of the occult science was desired by our correspondent and his pupil to give his views upon the state of the soul of the fellow d'essai. He did so, and it is with the kind permission of his pupil, that we now translate and publish his manuscript. Though personally we are far from agreeing with all his opinions, for having been a priest, Eliphas Levi could never rid himself to his last day of a certain theological bias, we are yet prepared to always lend a respectful ear to the teachings of so learned a Kabbalist. Like Agrippa and, to a certain extent, Paracelsus himself, Abbe Constant may be termed a biblical or Christian Kabbalist, though Christ was in his sight more of an ideal than of a living man-god or an historical personage. Moses and Christ, if real entities, were human initiates into the arcane mysteries in his opinion. Jesus was the type of regenerated humanity, the deific principle being shown under a human form but to prove humanity alone divine. The mysticism of the official church, which seeks to absorb the human in the divine nature of Christ, is strongly criticized by her ex-representative. More than anything else, Eliphas Levi is then a Jewish Kabbalist. But were we even so much disposed to alter or amend the teachings of so great a master in occultism, it would be more than improper to do so now, since he is no longer alive to defend and expound his positions. We leave the unenviable task of kicking dead and dying lions to the jackasses, voluntary undertakers of all attacked reputations. Thence, though we do not personally agree with all his views, we do concur in the verdict of the world of letters that Eliphas Levi was one of the cleverest, most learned, and interesting of writers upon all such abstruse subjects. A Suicides after State by Philiphas Levi. From an unpublished letter, voluntary death is the most irredeemable of sinful actions, but it is also the least inexcusable of crimes owing to the painful effort required to accomplish it. Suicide is the result of weakness demanding at the same time a great mental force. It may be inspired by devotion, as it can be due to selfishness, and proceeds as often through ignorance. Did men but know what a solidarity binds them together, that they live in other men as other men live in them, they would rejoice instead of lamenting in finding a double share of suffering allotted them in life, for, aware of the immutable law of universal equilibrium and harmony, they would be cognizant then of the double share of felicity due to them, hence they would be less ready to renounce their price of labor under the plea of the work being too rough. I pity sincerely your unfortunate friend, though it is for him and his like that the consoling words may be addressed. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I am asked what could be done to help his suffering soul. I would certainly never advise you to turn for consolation to the Church. Though she does not forbid hope, the Church regards the suicide as one debarred forever from the communion of saints, her rigorous laws forcing her always to condemn him. You may help the poor deserter of life, with prayer, but that prayer must be one of action, not words. See whether he has not left something undone, or might not have done some more good on earth than he has, and then try to accomplish the deed for him, and in his name. 1. Give alms for him, but intelligent and delicate alms, for the latter bear fruit only when helping the cripple and the old, those who are incapable of working, and the Kabbalistic theory is, that a man having so many years, days, and tours to live upon earth and not 1 minute less than the period allotted to him by fate, whenever the ego gets consciously and deliberately rid of its body before the hour maked, for then must it still live even as a disembodied suffering soul. The ego, or the sentient individual soul, is unable to free itself from the attraction of the earth and has to vegetate and suffer all the torments of the mythical hell in it. It becomes an elementary spirit, and when the hour of deliverance strikes, the soul having learned nothing, and in its mental torture lost the remembrance of the little it knew on earth, it is violently ejected out of the earth's atmosphere and carried adrift, a prey to the blind current which forces it into some new reincarnation which the soul itself is unable to select as it otherwise might with the help of its good actions. Money devoted to charity ought to serve to encourage labor and not to favor and promote laziness. If that hapless soul moves you so much to compassion, and you feel such a sympathy for it, then does that feeling come from on high, and you will become the providence and light of that soul. It will live, so to say, on your intellectual and moral life, receiving in the great darkness into which it has rushed by its action no other light but the reflection of your good thoughts for it. But know, that by establishing between yourself and a suffering spirit such a special bond of union, you expose yourself to the risk of feeling the reflection of analogous suffering. You may experience great sadness, doubts will assail you, and make you feel discouraged. That poor being adopted by you, may, perhaps, cause you the same agony as the child on the eve of being born makes his mother suffer. The last comparison is so exact that our forefathers have given to that adoption of suffering souls the name of embryonate in our holy science, occultism. I have touched this subject in my work The Science of Spirits, but, as the question concerns you now personally, I will try to make the idea plainer. A suicide may be compared to a madman, who, to avoid work, would cut off his hands and feet and thus would force others to carry and work for him. He has deprived himself of his physical limbs before his spiritual organs were formed. Life has become impossible to him in such a state, but that which for him is still more impossible is to annihilate himself before his time. If, then, he is fortunate enough to find a person devoted enough to his memory to sacrifice himself and offer him a refuge, he will live through and by that person's life, not according to the way of the vampires, but according to that of the embryos who live on their mother's substance without diminishing for it that substance. For nature supplies the waste and gives much to those who spend much. In his prenatal life the child is conscious of his existence and manifests already his will, by movements independent of, and undirected by, his mother's will, and causing her even pain. The baby is ignorant of his mother's thoughts, and the latter knows not what her child may be dreaming of. She is conscious of two existences but not of two distinct souls in her, as their two souls are one in the feeling of her love, and that the birth of her babe does not sever the souls as it does the two bodies. It only gives them, if I may use the expression, a new polarization, as the two ends of a magnet. The same in death, which is our second birth. Death does not separate but only polarizes the two souls which were sincerely attached to each other on this earth. The souls disenthralled from their earthly fetters elevate our own to themselves, and in our turn our souls can attract them down through a power similar to that of the magnet. But the sinful souls suffer two kinds of torture. One is the result of their imperfect disenthrallment from the terrestrial bonds which keeps them down chained to our planet, the other is owing to a lack of celestial magnet. 8. The latter becomes the lot of those souls which having despaired have violently broken the chain of life, hence of their equilibrium, and have to remain in consequence in a state of absolute helplessness until a generous embodied soul volunteers to share with them its magnetism and life, and so helps them in time to re-enter into the current of universal life by furnishing the needed polarization. You know what that word means. It is borrowed from astronomy and physical science. Stars have opposite and analogous poles which determine the position of their axis, and natural as well as artificial magnets have the same. The law of polarization is universal and rules the world of spirits as that of physical bodies. 2. It would be an error to infer from the above that Eliphas Levi believed in the so-called spiritualism. He derided both the spiritualistic and the spiritist theory of the return of the disembodied souls or spirits in an objective or materialized form on earth. Teaching the Kabbalistic doctrine of the subjective intercommunication between the embodied and the disembodied spirits, and the mutual influence exercised by those souls, that influence is limited by him to purely psychological and moral effects, and lasts but so long as the pure soul slumbers in its transitory state in the ether, or the sinful one. The elementary spirit is kept in bondage in the earthly regions. 3. Celestial magnet means here that spiritual buoyancy, the absence of sinful deeds and thoughts supposed to be possessed of a material heaviness, which alone is enabled to carry the disembodied soul to higher or rather to purer regions. Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology by H. P. Blavatsky, Volume I, Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Volume 2, Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H. P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume 2 Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in 1, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to The Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above. Reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of theosophy by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H. P. Blavatsky. A blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H. P. Blavatsky. A collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge. A comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the theosophical movement, widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita rendered into English by William Q. Judge. An ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. Cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge. Indian edition Letters That Have Helped Me by W. Q. Judge. American edition, and shorter Indian edition The Friendly Philosopher compiled from letters and talks by Robert Crosby, 415 pages, cloth American edition Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition. 5 years of Theosophy essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560,004 India.